Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I am John Negroni, chief editor of Cinemaholics. I'm also a film critic for Awards Watch, The Spool, and The Young Folks. And I'd subscribe to a YouTube channel if it was run by Andrew Garfield, I'm not gonna lie. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he just sold his car so he can pay rent. It's Will Ashton.
What up?
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive on cinemaholics.com. We also have written reviews and other bonus content for you to find there. You can write into the show anytime by sending us an email. We'd love to hear from you, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like to support this podcast, keep the fun going, there's two main ways. First, you can become one of our patrons on patreon.com/cinemaholics. Or you can get your hands on some Cinemaholics merchandise. We have a merch page on cinemaholics.com, so get yourself a hoodie, mug, t-shirt, or shot glass. Links to all that and more are in the show notes. Will, quite a week ahead of us. We just had our Wrath of Man review come out yesterday. So I talked to Isaac Feldberg about that new Guy Ritchie, Jason Statham movie. You weren't there. I promised the listeners, though, that they would hear from you eventually.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately hadn't had a chance to see that film yet. I want to. I'm looking forward to seeing it in the theater when I am fully. I am fully vaccinated now, but I have that trial period.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Well, I guess it's like almost a week now, so just a matter of days before I find myself back in the multiplex with my lovely big screen experience. But unfortunately, that day has not yet come, but it will soon.
Yeah, it turns out for me, my first trip back to the movie theater has been scheduled, planned. It's in the book. I'm going to be seeing Quiet Place 2 as soon as my 2 weeks are up. So I'm very, very excited. That's going to be my first movie in the theater. It's not going to be like a roll of the dice kind of situation where it's a movie. I mean, who knows if Quiet Place 2 is good, but just in the sense that, I mean, the first one was such a great theatrical experience, the first Quiet Place, because of the sound design of it, and it was just such a satisfying kind of blockbuster movie. And then we have John Krasinski coming back as director, Emily Blunt. I have pretty good expectations for this one, so very excited to get back into the theater again. I know you are too.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
But that was a great conversation about Wrath of Man I had with Isaac Feldberg. We got to have the guy back on. He was fantastic.
I agree. For a second, I thought you were just talking about our just conversation right there. Like you were just saying, that was a great conversation about the movie theaters. Sorry, I was caught off guard.
You could take or leave that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
You're like, geez, John, quit pandering. No, the Wrath of Man conversation, even better. If you like that movie theater conversation, buckle up. It was great, so definitely don't miss that. Yeah,
absolutely.
I did want to mention here, because we are reviewing a few films this week. We both saw Mainstream, which is the new IFC Films movie starring Andrew Garfield and Maya Hawke. There's also this new Netflix film called Monster. There is an MTV Films thing called Pink Skies Ahead. So we had, some indie stuff to get into here. But there was just so many other movies that have been coming out. We really just did not have the time or gumption to cover just about everything.
Yeah, it's a weird time for the movies right now. I mean, usually it's a weird time, but right now it's just weird because it's like an influx of stuff that was supposed to come out, I guess, a year ago now is coming out or starting to come out. Yeah. And then we have these kind of smaller movies that are competing for our attention. And then they also have these streaming movies that are coming out, which are a mix of, originals and things that were supposed to go to theaters that are now just going to streaming. So just a weird time to be covering movies.
Yeah. A lot of festival movies that got picked up and were probably going to come out in 2020 or something. Or, in the case of Monster, it was supposed to come out years ago.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that was supposed to come out. Yeah.
Yeah, probably 2019 or something. And here we are, I think, almost 4 years later. So
yeah. And that's also the case for Profile, which I watched over the weekend. We're going to be talking about that hopefully next week. That was another 2018 movie that's coming out in 2021. That's even weirder for reasons I'll talk about later.
Yeah, next week is going to be such a packed week. So thank you for listening to our show, keeping up with us. We're doing our best to cover what we can cover. Speaking of which, though, there is a movie that I was not able to see myself, but we wanted to get it in here for Off Topics, do a mini review for you. It's called The Waterman, because Will Ashton has seen this one, so we wanted to bring it up. Now, Will, you saw The Waterman at TIFF last September, correct?
That's right, yeah, and I also did a written review for the film that is now available on the Cinemaholics website.
Well done. And yeah, this one is directed and produced by David Oyelowo. He also stars in the film with Rosario Dawson, Alfred Molina, and I believe Oprah Winfrey is an executive producer, if I'm not mistaken. So
I think so.
Yeah. I don't know much about this movie, The Waterman. What's your mini review? What are we talking? This is the directorial debut of Oyelowo too, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think he did like a short film in like 2019 or something, but this is his feature directorial debut. And as far as a showcase for him as a director, I don't think it's too bad. It's a very ambitious film to start with as a filmmaker. It's a mix of fantasy and character drama, and it's like kind of in that Pan's Labyrinth mode where it's like not fully for children, but it's like also like a little too whimsical for adults. And that's a very tricky balance to pull off, especially, like I said, for a feature directorial debut. And unfortunately, I don't think he quite nails the landing here. I don't think the balance, like I said, is quite right. I don't think the kid performances are all the way there. I think the lead kid is very good. There's a side character who I forget the actress's name, but I remember her performance being a bit off, and that kind of that undermined the film in the later sections of the film. But there is a very sweet dynamic, I'd say, between David Oyelowo's character in the film, our lead boy, and his mother, who's played, like you said, by Rosario Dawson. It doesn't necessarily do anything you wouldn't expect out of the like sick parent trope, but it is very earnest, very sweet in its approach, and I do appreciate that the movie isn't afraid to show some of the more dramatic and upsetting things that can happen in a relationship like that. I know some movies like this kind of tend to shy away from showing that, and this movie does a pretty good job of balancing out the realness of it, but also not showing you the full depths of it to, really bring this movie down to a dramatic halt. So I think there's something here. Like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I don't want to like speak too much on it because it's been, I want to say like, I don't know, probably at this point over 6 months since I've seen it, so it's not as fresh in my mind. I just remember feeling like it's like almost there, like there's enough in it that I admire David Oyelowo for taking it on and trying to do something pretty ambitious as a first-time filmmaker, but I don't think he quite sticks a landing here. But if he does direct again, I would be very curious to see what he does next, because clearly, he has ambitions. He wants to do some big, grand stories as a filmmaker in addition to being quite an accomplished actor. So I'd give it like a warm C+. Like I just don't think it's quite there enough to really succeed, but it's easy to see what he found in the story. I keep thinking it's based on a book or a novel of some sort, but I don't think it is actually. I believe it's an original screenplay.
Yeah, by Emma Needle.
Yeah. It's very easy to see what he saw in the material, and I think a better version of this film would have been A Monster Calls, which came out a few years prior, and it's kind of unfortunate that movie basically does what this movie's trying to do, but better in almost every respect. Okay. Yeah, it's not awful, just sort of okay, lukewarm. If you want to check it out, it does seem like a lot of people are liking and enjoying it, so I guess I'm a little bit more negative than some critics, but not by a whole lot. Just kind of like, it's like a shrug for me. It's like, I think it's almost there. It just doesn't quite pull off the landing.
Yeah. So I remember hearing this one was supposed to originally be distributed by Disney, so it definitely lost a little bit of interest with me, that it kind of got shuffled over to IRLJE Films. Nothing against IRLJE. I love plenty of their output.
Sure.
That said, though, yeah, just a little bit of a lack of confidence in the project after that. And I have to admit, Will, when it comes to like sick parent movies, that is a mood that I really, really struggle to like bring myself to watch. Even movies like Guardians of the Galaxy. I told you I was rewatching that film over the past weekend, and even that subplot, just something about it, just really, it's rough. And the whole movie about that, no thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the whole movie, but it's a good sizable chunk of it. But I would say, I mean, I think, like I said, I don't I don't think it's necessarily the quality of the film that scared Disney away. I just have to imagine it's because, like I said, it's not like a super heartwarming film in the sense of like it like you said, it's like very depressing for early sections of the film, and it does feel like kind of more adult in its approach. So I have to imagine that Disney's like, we just don't really know how to sell this,
Okay.
like to like a wide audience, but just based on kind of having a morose tone. And like I said, they didn't distribute a Monster Calls, right? That was like Universal or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could see like someone like Universal picking it up, but well, I forget the name of the studio that did pick it up. I'm sure
RLJ.
yeah, RLJ. Yeah. They've done a few things of late, I know. So they've been trying to come up, and I can definitely see the appeal here because it's another star-studded film from a up-and-coming director, prominent actor. So I can see the play here. It just, I guess, it doesn't quite work out for me.
So it's a warm C+, not a heartwarming C+. Makes sense.
There you go. Yeah.
And it's 92 minutes long, and it's a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. So decent reviews. All right. I want to talk about Jupiter's Legacy real fast here. The new show on Netflix. And I watched the first season, which is made up of 8 episodes. And this is like the latest superhero comic book adaptation show that we've gotten. I know, we've gotten so many in 2021. And I've already talked a bit about my favorite comic book adaptation show this year so far, which is Invincible, the animated show. We did a whole episode about Invincible season 1 with Mekishana and Pierre. It was a blast, because that is a really great show. It's based on the Robert Kirkman comic. This one is based on a comic book series that came out through Image, and it's a Mark Millar joint. And he did it with Frank Quitely. And the whole premise of Jupiter's Legacy is it's kind of taking like the whole idea of the Justice League and sort of mixing it with the Incredibles. And people might be like, Incredibles, don't you mean Fantastic Four? Because that's where Incredibles is really kind of... No, because I think Incredibles, that whole family dynamic where it's like parents and their kids have superpowers inherited from their parents. It's like that, except there's like a whole Justice League made up of... parents and kids with superpowers. And the show takes place half in the modern day and then half in the late 1920s, early 1930s, like right as the Great Depression is happening. And there's this whole origin story happening in the background of the show of like, well, where did these people get their powers? Because there's this whole thing where the main guy, Josh Duhamel, he plays a guy named the Utopian, who's basically, I guess, kind of like Superman, at least the archetype of Superman. He's not nearly as strong as Superman, basically. And he and his family, they age a lot slower. So even though he was like a fully grown man in 1929, in the modern day, he's older, but he looks like he's in his like early 50s or something like that. And the show itself kind of like follows this family sort of dealing with like the kids are adults now. One of them's like very rebellious, and she's not very up to the superhero task of protecting the world. And then the parents are debating whether or not it's okay to kill people. They have like this code. I'm just gonna say it. This show sucks. It's lame. I was so bored during this show. I mean, like, Will, you know how you told us this? It's called this thing about the superhero fatigue.
Sure. I don't think I'm the first to coin this phrase, but yes.
I thought you were invented it.
Oh, really? All right.
I thought so.
All right. Well, that's awful nice of you, but I don't believe I am.
I've felt trace amounts of superhero fatigue over the years.
It was overdue.
It's never been overwhelming. Like I felt it a little bit. I felt it a little bit during The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I felt it a little bit during like Spider-Man: Far From Home, and I felt it during Aquaman. There were just these times where, like Doctor Strange, right? It's just like, man, this whole origin thing. I've seen this. Like, we're doing this again, and usually there's something about Captain Marvel to an extent. Yeah, there's usually something though about those movies that like stands out, that has like a flavor, like a spice or something that kind of makes it worth it. Like with Captain Marvel, I think like the squirrel stuff and the buddy comedies, like that kind of stands. There's Goose the cat, like there's stuff that I can look at that I'm like, okay, this is not a worthless experience.
Wait, was the squirrel stuff? Was that Flores and Ulysses?
No, not squirrel. Skrull. Squirrel.
Oh,
SKR.
I see.
You thought I mixed up Captain Marvel and Flora and Ulysses?
I don't know. I mean, you sound pretty tired, so I didn't know if you were like
That's true.
conflating the two.
Okay.
What movie
enough.
would that be?
I don't want to see that movie.
Sure.
Flora and Ulysses is another good call out, though. That was just a movie that was like so up a corner of comic books. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, and Jupiter's Legacy is definitely an extension of that. It definitely feels like Netflix really wants to do a big budget live action series in the same vein as like The Boys and the same vein as like these Marvel shows and Watchmen and all of these things. It has elements of Watchmen, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
And they've done successful comic book adaptations. We like Umbrella Academy over here. I mean, that's 2 seasons. I really dig Umbrella Academy, but it's very low key. It's not, it's a bit more of like
that's more like X-Men though, right? That's like them
it's more X-Men, and it's more like kind of sci-fi weird kind of thing. I mean, it's not like straight up superhero stuff, but it also subverts and satirizes superhero and comic book storytelling because it's sort of about how being a superhero is like messed up and traumatizes those kids.
It sounds like Umbrella Academy is like what New Mutants should have been.
Maybe. I mean,
in a way, yeah.
I don't know, because there is like the horror stuff in Umbrella Academy that kind of works a little bit better or a little bit more consistently. With Jupiter's Legacy, I mean, I watched this show and it plays the superhero thing so straight in the year of our Lord 2021, maybe because it's based on a comic book series that came out in 2013, but even still, I think like Invincible, watching that came out in 2003, and that was very subversive. It was bringing a lot of gore and commentary on like the violence of being a superhero. With Jupiter's Legacy, the hook of it is there's this old guard, a golden age of superheroes worried about passing on their legacy to their kids because they don't think their kids can deal. It's baby boomers and millennials, the superhero show. Like, no thanks. Like, it's just, as a story, I just could not get into this. There was like a beaming ray of hope in this show where we get introduced to this guy who he has no powers. His dad was a superhero who became evil. And he has no powers, but he has this device that lets him teleport. And he's played by this guy, Ian Quinlan. He gets a whole episode basically to himself. And I was like, this is the show. Like, this guy. Like, this is your protagonist. I care about him. I sympathize with him. If it was about him and this super lame like union of superheroes were the antagonists, or at the not antagonists because they're villains, but like they are obstacles in the way of like good things happening in this world, which they're kind of hinting at. There you go. You've got a show right there. But then it kind of tosses them aside, and then no, we got to go back to Superboy, or the son of the utopian whoever, who's like angsty and
what is
I don't know.
So you're saying like if there was like a superhero show or project where there's like a bureaucracy of superheroes and like it's become so like confluted with like different like rules and regulations that like superheroes are kind of like confined. Is that what you're suggesting? Like, and that would be like the pitch of the show?
Yeah, because they really don't have that element in full force in this. It really just comes down to like you can't kill people when even to save lives. Yeah. It's a whole show set around the premise of the last few minutes of Man of Steel, which like who wants that?
Like that Civil War Captain America, like if the
Sokovia Accords.
Yeah.
Well, see that stuff. To me, there is an interesting thing there where it's like superheroes who are being like restrained by the government and stuff like that getting in their way.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were suggesting. Yeah, like if like superheroes are like kind of so bogged down by like like regulations and rules and stuff that like like there would be like this kind of like oppressive force. I don't know if that's a good idea, but it's like kind of interesting. It would be a little different.
A little bit, and I assume that's what they want to go for in parts. The problem with this show is that that's barely in it. It really just comes down to like the kids of the superheroes hating their lives, and then we cut back to this like weirdly realized backstory in like the 1920s and 1930s, which imagine a whole show centered around the most boring aspect of an origin story. For me, the most boring aspect of an origin story is the part in between something bad happening and the part where they get their powers. So you spend all of this time of like how they're going to get their powers, and it's so tedious and it's so slow, and it's just the pacing in the show is just awful. And then after watching this show, and like, I don't know, apparently it has its fans. It's number 1 on Netflix right now. I don't understand it. Like I was watching this and I wanted to bow out so many times. And I wish I could have, but I was covering the show for the spool. So that said, I was not a fan of Jupiter's Legacy. If I'm sounding too harsh though, and I, you know, maybe people do like this for reasons I just are missing me, hit us up. send me a message. I want to hear some positive thoughts on this. I want to hear an argument for like why people might enjoy this show, because I don't see it.
It sounds like it's missing the Matthew Vaughn touch that the other Mark Millar adaptations had, for better or for worse.
And maybe I think Vaughn has such a good knack for like there's nothing about this thing technically that's impressive. Like they clearly have a big budget, but like the look of these superheroes is laughable. Like their costumes, and Josh Duhamel looks bizarre as an older person here. Like his like white long hair, it's just like, it does not work here. And I mean, Leslie Bibb pulls it off because it's Leslie Bibb, but
yeah, she's great.
Otherwise, yeah. And they have this weird like coked up makeup they're putting on Ben Daniels, and Ben Daniels, what are you doing, man? This is so beneath you. I very much wish that this had gone a little bit differently. So that is Jupiter's Legacy. I do not recommend checking it out, especially if you have any sort of fatigue with superheroes. I mean, Will, you've commented how you think a lot of the Marvel movies look way too much the same, and like they kind of have a bland visual style, particularly with like the Civil War airport scene where they're running at each other.
I don't know if that was the one I pointed out, but sure. The general aesthetic of Marvel is meant to be so familiar and boilerplate, so as to, you know, not make the stylistic jumps between each character and property too jarring. But yeah, I feel like it makes visually most of these movies kind of plain and shallow looking. Imagine
2 notches below that.
Okay.
And that's where we're at here. And it's played seriously and straight.
Sure.
That's Jupiter's Legacy. There you go. All right. Well, that's enough for off topics. Let's talk about a movie.
Two things we loved. So hopefully we're going to jump into another thing that we just loved.
Well, you know, him or not. That is the tagline for the new movie, Mainstream.
Who am I? What do you want to do with your life, Frankie?
I don't know.
All right, what kind of stuff you want to make? I think you got potential. I want to make a next picture.
Really?
Yeah.
What, now?
Yeah, right now.
Yo, what's up? Thanks for checking out this video.
My little niece worships these guys who do and say nothing
Yo, why is my existence so lit?
and promote a lifestyle of doing and saying nothing.
Hashtag swimming pool, hashtag cocktail, hashtag this pineapple life. You can't be following me. Like, I'm no one special, man.
Holy.
You've got talent. Do you want to be the guys that made 2 cool videos? Or do you want to be no one special?
This is the beginning.
People came.
Oh my God! This is all about it. We're all here.
It's crazy how good this is, huh?
We have phone or no phone.
I'm Charles Melton, and I'm here with No One Special.
Then we have the game show. Bad idea. Good idea?
I love you, No One Special.
This is just feeling so right. We're about to go stratospheric.
Mainstream was directed by Gia Coppola, the granddaughter of Francis Ford Coppola, and I think she's the niece of Sofia Coppola, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I think that's how
her
it
aunt.
works out.
Yeah, Sofia Coppola is her aunt, I believe.
Yeah. Gia Coppola, you've heard of. She's done a bunch of music videos. She directed, her first film was Palo Alto from 2013.
I saw that.
Solid movie. Yeah. Emma
Yeah, I thought it was
Roberts,
all right.
James Franco. Interesting movie.
Yeah. Better than the source material, I think, from what I can recall.
Her new movie is called Mainstream, and it stars Andrew Garfield, Maya Hawke, Nat Wolff, Jason Schwartzman, and I was not expecting to see Johnny Knoxville in this movie, but he's in here as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Star-studded cast.
Very star-studded. Very star-studded. I was not expecting a lot of faces here. I was not expecting this movie to look like it did. It's a very indie movie, but it has some production budget here.
I mean, it's a Coppola production. You know, they tend to get some clout. They have connections in Hollywood. I don't think that's a shock.
This was produced by Automatic, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say though, I don't even know if Jason Schwartzman was even signed up. I just feel like anytime there's a Coppola production, he just shows up by obligation. He's just like, I don't know what's going on. I got the date and the place. I just show up. Yeah. I'm obligated by law to be here.
Yeah. Well, this premiered at the Venice Film Festival last September, around the same time as TIFF, and IFC is now releasing this. In a lot of ways, to me, it feels almost like a spiritual follow-up to Andrew Garfield's last LA strange noir movie, Under the Silver Lake. I know a lot of people are bringing that movie up for good reason.
I mean, tonally, I can see that. Narratively, I don't really see it as much. Character-wise, I can sort of see it.
I think what people are comparing is the creative polarization of this movie combined with its setting and its commitment to its own bit. That is, I think, the connective tissue between the two movies.
Sure. Well, they're both divisive films. I'll agree.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. They're movies that I think make people think, and they make people feel a lot of things they may not want to feel. So if you go to Letterboxd, you are going to see a range. You know, I'm seeing 1 stars. I'm seeing 2 stars. Yeah. I'm also seeing 3 stars, 5 stars, 4 stars from people. It is a mix. I'm seeing people who aren't even grading it and just like hearting it because they just want to stay out of the drama.
Well, for me, I guess the difference between this and Under the Silver Lake is that I think whether you dig Under the Silver Lake or not, you know, that's kind of a personal thing. I think that movie is what it is. Like, I think it's very thoughtful in its approach. Like, I think, like, the complaints that some people make about it aren't really on base because I think the movie is pretty well aware of how much of a scumbag that main character is. And it's just like, it's kind of doing a satirization of a very specific type of millennial that lives in LA. And this movie, I think, is trying to do something similar, and it's very confident as well, but I don't think it's quite as secure in its tone or execution.
Okay, well, dang, already getting your review out. Well, we haven't even said what it's about.
Sure.
Let's tell the listeners, because I have a feeling they haven't seen the trailer for this. I had not seen the trailer. I barely had heard of it before we looked at reviewing this one.
Sure.
But it was shot in 2019, so it's been on the shelf for a minute. And it was going to originally screen at Telluride last year, but, you know, COVID happened. It did get to Venice, though. And this movie is not just directed by Gia Coppola. She also co-wrote it with Tom Stewart. And we spend most of the first part of the movie with Maya Hawke's character, the co-lead of the film. She plays a young woman named Frankie Maya Hawke. Of course, we've talked about her with like Stranger Things, most recent season. She's kind of coming into her own as a Hollywood actor.
Yeah, I just realized the only time I've actually seen her in anything was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So this was, I guess, indirectly my introduction to her, which didn't feel like it because I'm just so used to the internet talking about her. So it's just like it took me a minute to be like, oh yeah, this is like the first like starring role I've seen from her.
Yeah, because in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think she was like one of the Manson.
Yeah, she has like that. Maybe like 5 minutes of screen time or something. Maybe.
Yeah, she's like in the very end of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Maya Hawke, she is definitely like carrying this film in the very beginning, and she has like a dead end job at this bar that has like talent where we do get to see Colleen Camp show up. That's fun. And she has a run-in with this guy named Link, who is very eccentric, just says a lot of stuff that whoa, he's doing that in public. And he's played, of course, by Andrew Garfield. At Frankie's job, she, of course, is being crushed on hard by one of the other bartenders, and they're kind of friends. He's friend-zoned. He's played by Nat Wolff, and his name is Jake. And eventually, Maya Hawke kind of, her character kind of comes to Link and is like, I need to film you. Like, she sees him as somebody who could make her internet famous. And that's like her main goal right now. She's definitely, she's not in school anymore. She's definitely not reaching the potential of her YouTube channel. She is like early on in this film, which I appreciated. It starts with that trope of like something reportedly going viral, but then of course it's not viral. She's just like, it's got like 2,000 views. And I got a little kick out of that. I was like, that's realistic. But that's usually what happens there. But that said, she eventually concocts a plan because she thinks this guy Link, he's so bizarre, he's so creative, that if she just films him doing stuff or tries to put him in certain situations, people will really like him and people will subscribe to him, and she can sort of produce a YouTube channel. So this film is definitely a commentary on the internet and what people like and subscribe to, right? It is about influencer culture, and we see these three characters because Jake kind of comes on as a writer. Of course, he just wants to get close to Frankie. He's got a little crush. And there's like a little bit of a love triangle going on here. Least interesting thing about the movie, though, I think what's most interesting about this movie is the way Andrew Garfield's performance really informs a lot of what you're either going to like or love about, or sorry, like or love, what you're either going to like or don't like about this movie. And its takeaway is really, really tricky. There's some stuff in here. Will, what did you think of this movie?
Well, I guess I'm kind of two minds on the film, because I think the movie itself, like the movie that Gia Coppola wants to make, is the type of film that I think is trying to be very forward-thinking, very much like, if we don't do something about this, this is what's going to happen. But it feels like that's already happened and we've already exceeded that point. So coming out of the gate, it already kind of feels dated. Like, this feels like the type of commentary we would have gotten in like 2014, maybe 2015, about internet culture and influence culture.
No, I disagree.
You disagree?
2014 is way too long ago. I think this influencer culture is way more like 2019, 2018.
Okay,
like this brand.
fair enough. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'll split the difference and say 2018. Does that sound more accurate?
I think that's fair, because that's 8th grade. You know,
Sure.
that's when that's really starting to come into its own or swell.
Because I'm thinking like, you know, like the Pauls, like Logan and Jake Paul, and like the Vine stars are kind of they're starting to shift into YouTube culture, and like that's where that's kind of coming into prevalence.
That was, but 2014, that was really early for it. Like, I don't think it was nearly at the prominence it is today.
All right, my bad. That was too early. But yeah, so 2018 is what.
Sorry, I didn't mean to scold you or come off that way.
Sure,
Well.
no, fair enough. It's a good point. 2018 was more what I meant to say. But like basically what I'm trying to say is like that era of like YouTubers are kind of becoming like a thing. Like that's something that young people want to kind of aspire to, in like a way that's like older generations don't really get it. Even like older millennials don't really get it that much. But like, you know, like these like type of YouTubers are becoming like their own sort of movie stars for a younger generation, and it's like kind of weird because like their brand doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just like their general lifestyles, which are kind of like flamboyant and over the top, and like they don't really have like much of an identity besides like kind of like loud editing tactics and stuff like that. And I get like that's something they satirize, and I think that's something that's worth parodying. But like the movie itself kind of feels like what's saying about that doesn't really feel like anything we've really haven't already said at this point, like especially with all the trials that have gone through with the Pauls themselves. Like they're such larger than life internet figures at this point that they kind of like they almost feel like parodies of themselves at this point. So it's like it's almost kind of redundant to what this movie's trying to say about them or anyone like them. But at the same time, like I do agree with you that I think the Andrew Garfield factor is what kind of wins me in this movie's favor, because I was pretty much with it for the first, like, I want to say 45 minutes or so. Like, when it is, like, kind of setting up this oddball Link character and his correspondence with Maya Hawke's character, and like kind of like the little like weird meet cute that they have, the very like Coppola-esque like odd visual aesthetics where it's like kind of like the silent film era stuff, and like just like kind of odd assorted meetups and like different like just the general like enthusiasm of like getting into filmmaking and finding an audience, stuff like that is very charming. When it kind of goes into the network era where it's like kind of like doing like a YouTube version of network, it feels kind of tired and outdated. It's just like, okay, this type of commentary feels old, it feels tired, it doesn't really even make a whole lot of sense like doing a talk show in a traditional format. But for YouTube, that stuff was where it started to lose me. But then it started to kind of win me over again when it's going into like face in a crowd stuff, where it's like Andrew Garfield's character, without getting into spoilers, is like kind of on the precipice of like being outed, or like kind of like being like so huge on the internet that like the cultural backlash is starting to come in, and like he's like kind of pushing against it. And I'm like, okay, by the end of it, I'm kind of like, I don't think this really works, but there's enough here that I'm like kind of endeared by it. And I admire the movie for taking so many big swings that like I appreciate the movie for even like just trying to do something that's like kind of bombastic and absurd, even if I don't, like I said, think it's really saying anything new or relevant about what internet culture, influence culture is right now. But I almost admire the movie for being so spunky and weird and outlandish that I find myself kind of charmed by it, even if I don't really think it's that good of a film.
I struggle a little bit with this one for a lot of those reasons. Now, Gia Coppola, she's younger than Andrew Garfield in real life, the director of this film. She's 34. Andrew Garfield's 37. And a few things were very present in my mind while watching this. First of all, it's very awkward seeing Maya Hawke in like a sort of like love thing with Andrew Garfield. I don't really give away the details of it because it is kind of it's not that straightforward.
Yeah. It's not super clear how old Andrew Garfield's character is supposed to be.
Right. And so if you they never really say. And so if you just kind of like take it in real life, this is a 22-year-old woman who really looks like she's fresh out of high school, who is like lusting after a dude who's pushing 40. And I don't think the movie really quite reckons with that. I think it kind of is just hoping that you assume Andrew Garfield is around the same age as, like, say, Nat Wolff, who's like in his mid-20s, you know?
Well, he's got those blonde highlights, so that automatically takes 10 years off of him.
True. Yeah, and so some of that stuff, I see the logic, the math, the science of like, this is you gotta keep Andrew Garfield in here. You gotta cast him while he's still got some sort of like youthful veneer. And I'm not saying that that's not something that happens in real life, of course. Like, of course, you know, women in their early 20s are going to date men who are much older than them, or at least have like some sort of like thing with them. I don't know. That said, yeah, there was just one element of the movie that I was kind of like, man, I don't know, like that in the like the game show thing, where I was like, that's your idea. I think where this movie loses me is when it charts the eventual like rise of the YouTube channel, because what I was hoping this movie was going to show is that, first of all, like if you put all of the writing and the production into the hands of this woman who is like clearly has like a very superficial like set of ideas of like a YouTube channel she wants to make, I don't know, it just sort of like assumes like through a montage this like meteoric rise, and I don't know, I just didn't buy it. Like I did not buy that this would have happened. I think that like one of two things has to happen. You either have to push a little harder on the influence of the Jason Schwartzman character, who kind of comes in and is like, I'll give you all a break here, but he seems to be profoundly hands off, and I just don't think that's really quite how it works. Like I really think, like, I'm not saying that like YouTube influencers do all of this stuff solely through like agents and producers and things like that. I think that like this is just sort of saying kind of indirectly that that's all you need is like the budget, and your super individual ideas are just going to like shine through. Yeah. And I didn't quite follow that.
Well, Yeah, it just like most things in the movie, it kind of feels like two ideas at once. It's like the idea that you're suggesting that like this older producer influence is like there and like kind of like the devil on their shoulder, like that's tempting them to the dark side of entertainment. Like that idea, like that he would be pushing them into like their worst impulses and stuff like that is an idea. But there's also like the idea that like he's this older guy who's like so profoundly out of touch, but wants to keep his relevance. That he's just like, hey, you know, like just whatever gets the clicks, baby, you know, just like that idea. It's like you kind of have to pick one for the character, and then he's kind of disappears for the second half of the movie after a point, which is also weird. And it's just like, yeah, I think that's kind of my general issue with the movie is that like it's trying to be very specific and satirize a particularly new era of entertainment culture in a very like sneering and biting way, but it's not really too super direct in terms of like who it wants to target and like who it's really poking at, either due to a general like lack of understanding of what that culture is, or like not really like having a firm point in terms of like what it wants to say about that culture and its influence. So it feels like I agree with you that like I think by that midpoint that's where it started to lose me as well, because just like this feels like so out of date to like the idea of like what they believe like the rise of influence culture is just feels like what a boomer would kind of feel like it is when it's like something totally different now.
Exactly.
Yeah, and just like that, I agree with you. Like, because I think the spunky like kids are kind of like trying to find their fame, and like you said, like they have this like kind of superficial idea of like what internet culture is or like what internet fame is. That's actually kind of charming and sweet, and I kind of like those moments. But then the second half is where it dipped away.
I think this movie would have worked so much better if they had always been on like the cusp of something that would have pushed them into like the stratosphere,
like a Nightcrawler thing.
Exactly. Yeah, kind of like that. Just this like zone of like you're not quite there yet, and that's what's like pushing them to try to go that one extra step further to what they think that they want. But I don't know, the movie kind of like pushes them to like they reach basically they get what they want. And then it's all about like, well, how do we keep it? How do we maintain it? And I think that would have been more interesting if they had reached that zone of like maybe they only have like 100,000 subscribers or something. You know what I'm saying? Instead of it going like way farther than that. And they're like, we're almost there. Like we're getting so close to this thing taking off, but people are starting to lose interest. How do we like? What do we do to really get this thing even farther? And like that kind of pressure, that tension, the Jason Schwartzman person being like, maybe starting to lose faith in them. I don't know. This movie's missing that because it's missing what really drives Link to do what he does in this movie. I think that he just like wanders through the script here.
I think I would be fine with that in terms of Link if he didn't become the main character in the second half of the film. And I understand why he becomes the main character because he's like the most dynamic personality here, and he's like also the star of the film with Andrew Garfield. So that's like that kind of makes sense. But like you say, he's like kind of like a blank slate in terms of a character, and like when Maya Hawke is no longer becoming like the lead focus here, it kind of loses its way because it's like her character is like it's not super original, but it is sort of defined. And like you said, like there's so much ambiguity that's thrown onto Andrew Garfield's character that we can't really emotionally latch on to anything with him because like the movie has been so vague about who he is for most of the film.
Right.
So it's just like, yeah, it's just like, it just kind of feels like you can kind of do, like I said, like the Nightcrawler thing where like we're watching a man like become like as you were joking, like the Joker or something. like he kind of just becomes like this parody of himself and like kind of just like loses his way due to fame or like this like power hungry drive to like, you know, to find like that next step that you're applying. Or we can kind of focus on the producer. It's like watching us in horror as like, you know, like this person that like this, well, like, you know, kind of eccentric, but like good-hearted guy who's like wants to send a message about the hypocrisies of internet culture, like becomes like a parody of himself. Like you can kind of do both, but like I said, it's like two ideas at once, and the movie's kind of doing both without doing either.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick to that because that whole idea of like this really does feel like Nightcrawler for influencer culture, or at least that's what it's trying to do. I don't think it's as successful, but I do respect the hustle here. I really respect what it's doing at the very end when it's starting to really showcase the like twistedness of this character.
The face in the crowd moment, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, which I like. I that won me over again a little bit.
Mm-hmm. There's some really great iconography in this movie. We haven't talked about it on a very technical level, besides that it looks good. I mean, like we were saying in the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably visually the best looking film of the 3 films we're going to talk about this week.
Oh, easily for me.
Yeah.
I think that it's like dynamic. I was thinking of like one perfect shot like several times in this movie. And I really want to hype up Maya Hawke here. I don't think she has the best writing in this movie, but she's selling something really shallow and what could have been really insufferable if we had a lesser performer here. I've said before, she's young and she's still kind of like clearly like finding her way as an actor, but there's something about her presence. Like she really has, like, I think a lot of electricity on screen without trying that hard. Like she's never like fighting Andrew Garfield for attention, or she knows, like her character is able to just let him steal scenes, but you don't lose her, which is what makes it even sadder that the writing is what does that to her later in the film, to your point. And that's a big disappointment for me. I would have liked this a lot more if we had really stuck to her perspective throughout the whole way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super sold on her yet as an actress, but I think, like you're saying, like, I think it just felt that comes more from like inexperience. Like, I don't think she's just like, I do agree with you. I think she has that presence, and I think she has like the it factor that could make her a star. But like, I don't know if she really has defined herself enough as an actress to really like sell a movie or like carry a movie at this point. But yeah, she does have like kind of similar to her father, like that ability to like be like a stand-up performer and natural in a scene, but not like overtake the scene in like a big sort of way. And I do admire that from her at this point in her career. But yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what she does next. Like I said, I've only really seen her in one other thing because I haven't watched Stranger Things, so maybe that's where people are kind of seeing more of her star power at this point. But I'm definitely curious nonetheless.
Yeah, if you look at all 3 of those performances, clearly she's having a moment. Like she has potential here that is really strong. And we didn't mention, she's Ethan Hawke's daughter as well as Uma Thurman, which you can definitely tell there's a scene in this movie hearkening straight back to Pulp Fiction very directly. So that was a lot of fun. We haven't mentioned Nat Wolff much, because he really is the big afterthought of this movie. I guess that's kind of the point. I think I don't mind Nat Wolff as an actor or anything. I've liked him in a few things, but yeah, this was definitely one part of the movie that was very, very weak for me. It was very tropey. I mean, you've seen this guy in so many movies. Like, you know what's coming. It's
even though the screenplay seems like trying to kind of write him out. Just like, let's just do this thing we have to do with him. All right, back to Andrew Garfield.
Yeah. Or just, for this character, I think at this point, you really got to add something extra to the character. And they try a few things. They're like, well, he needs to be like the conscience, and I don't know. I don't think that's really well realized, but
I think you could have done something like maybe like he had like a troublesome past or something, and they have to distance themselves from him, and they have to like make a moral choice between like friendship or fame. That could have been interesting, but like, yeah, like they just kind of do the normal, like he likes her and doesn't like the ideas that they're spouting and stuff like that. So, oh well.
Yeah, boo-hoo. It's like, yeah, that's very high. It's very high school, and I guess like this movie is trying to treat these kids like kids in that way. This definitely doesn't feel like a Gen Z interpretation, though. Like they really don't feel like that at all, and they're not Gen Z. I think literally, I think Maya Hawke is technically Gen Z, or like right at the cusp.
Well, I think if she's 22, she would be Gen Z, right?
I think so, yeah, because I think millennials are like 23, 24, so she's like right on the line. And then, Nat Wolff, Andrew Garfield are like comfortable millennials, like kind of
definitely Garfield, but Nat Wolff, I'm not sure how old he is, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I just have a feeling that like the movie for like this moment in history, this like Gen Z YouTube influencer culture, I think the defining anthem of this time is probably not going to come from a millennial, or if it does, it's going to be a much younger one. No disrespect to Gia Coppola or Tom Stewart. I actually don't know if Tom Stewart is a millennial or anything like that. So I just think that it probably needs to come from like that voice to really make sense of it for other people. in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you saw Spree from last year that had what's his face, Steve.
Yes, from Stranger Things. What? I forget his name.
Whatever. I apologize because I thought he was really good in Spree, and that was a movie that's like kind of tried to also parody and satirize influence culture. And I'm not saying that movie is amazing, but I think it's a lot better and a lot more willing to take risks in terms of like what it's saying about influence culture. And it's also kind of doing the Nightcrawler thing. And I just kept thinking about that movie and being like, you know, like I said, not an amazing movie, but like that movie is clearly trying to do this whole thing and just doing it a lot better and a lot more realistic in terms of style and approach. Like the narrative of it gets super outlandish and weird and stuff like that, which I like.
See, I don't know about Spree, but I do know like Nerve. You know, speaking
like
of movies
Nerve,
with Emma Roberts, I think Nerve is kind of a fun way to tell this story using extremes, right? But ultimately that movie's about the same sort of thing. So I don't know. I don't think this is it, but
right.
I'll admit I was absorbed throughout this movie. This is one of those movies that I liked watching because I really like these performances. But then the more I've thought about it since I've seen it, I've been like, that was kind of shallow in a lot of ways. It's not a film I think I'll ever revisit, honestly. But I think there's a lot of cool stuff. I'm a C+.
Yeah, I think I'm a C+ as well. Like I said to you before, like I can't imagine someone who's Gen Z watching this and being like, yes, this is what it's like right now. Like I just imagine them being like, oh yeah, like I just imagine them being like, oh, this is cringe. Like this is like not like what it is right now. Like this is a millennial or a boomer trying to scold us for being us. And it's just like, yeah, like that's the other thing too, is like the movie does get pretty preachy towards the second half, and that also kind of undermines it because it just feels like, you know, like old man yells at cloud kind of thing. It's just like, okay, like, you know, I mean, like I like obviously it's like a satire, so it's going to be critical of this generation, but at the same time, like, you know, like it just kind of like if it's also being out of date and it's trying to scold you, then it just feels like extra cringy. But I do agree with you. Like I was never really bored watching this. Like I was constantly intrigued by Andrew Garfield's performance. I was constantly kind of amused by like where he was willing to go as an actor with this character. And I think as a footnote in his career, as this like now he's doing like kind of more character driven stuff with Silence and, like you said, Under the Silver Lake, and even Hacksaw Ridge, which is an amazing film either, but I think he's good in that. Like I think he's clearly like taking a lot of big risks, taking a lot of big swings as an actor, kind of similar to Robert Pattinson a few years ago following the success of Twilight, where he has like this clout and he's like, okay, let me see what I can do with this. Let me get weird with it. And I admire that. And I think that's the appeal here, is that like if you're doing a retrospective on Andrew Garfield, you're going to show clips from this movie and be like, oh wow, like if you like show like the end scene, like, okay, I'd be willing to check that out. Like that's a weird performance. Like let's see what this guy's going to do. And
yeah, how come nobody talked about this movie back in 2021?
Right. Exactly, yeah. And it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, this wasn't it wasn't that great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as a showcase for him and like you said, as a star vehicle for Mia Hawke, I think it's a good footnote movie in terms of like, okay, like this is like a showcase of what they can do. Let's see other directors do something better with them, or like better movies. I mean, because I think Gia Coppola, I liked her first movie. I think she's she's carving an interesting little niche for herself. Like I don't think she's trying to be Francis Ford Coppola, and I don't think she's even trying to be Sofia Coppola, but you know, she definitely wants to talk about a certain generational divide, like certain kind of cultures in LA and stuff like that. And I'm willing to explore that with other movies. Like I said,
she's the babysitter.
Yeah. I liked Palo Alto. Like I think she has a very unique little like style and stuff like that seems to kind of ring true to like what she wants to say. But
and that's not LA, to be clear. Palo Alto is Northern California.
Sorry, with the California is what I meant. But with a where was I going with that? I don't know. I lost my train of thought there. But anyway,
sorry. You like Gia Coppola?
Yeah, I like Gia Coppola. I think she's doing her own little thing, and I applaud her for that. I think she's kind of lost her way with this one, which, you know, tends to happen with sophomore films, and hopefully the next one's better.
Yeah, what are you gonna do? All right, well, that is Mainstream, and it was our main stream this past week. It is available to watch right now on demand. You can rent or buy it, and it's only 94 minutes long, clean hour 34. and its Rotten Tomatoes score. Have you seen its Rotten Tomatoes?
I saw it was like 27%.
It's at 28 now.
Okay, somebody liked it.
Yeah, somebody gave it. It's only out of 18 reviews, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but how it's going to go from there. But it's average rating is 3.8 out of 10. So big old yikes. I think it's another under the Silver Lake in that respect, at least. There you go, another connective.
I mean, I'm curious to see what the movie's legacy is after this. Like I said, like people did find Under the Silver Lake, and like I said, I do like that
Sure.
movie. I like it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Corey and I talked about it in a bonus episode, I believe, on this very podcast. I could maybe see that being the case here, like this movie kind of finding its audience just based on Andrew Garfield's performance, but I don't know. I'm not really seeing it, but who knows?
Let's talk about a new film that just came out on Netflix, and I use new very sparingly. This is the film we were talking about earlier that premiered at Sundance in, you guessed it, 2018. January 2018 as well. It was acquired by Netflix, and it's only just now getting its release 3 years later. And for that reason, you're going to see Kelvin Harrison Jr. in this movie playing a high schooler.
Fresh face.
Very difficult for me to like put those things together, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like, because we've seen him in a bunch of stuff lately where he's like in his mid to late 20s.
Well, he was
a lot of movies.
A high schooler in the two movies he did fairly recently around this time, right? Loose and
Waves.
Waves, yeah.
Yeah, very very good films. I really really liked Loose, and yeah, I think he got to this point. I think he was also kind of young in It Comes at Night, if I remember. But I think though he's like in his, I think he's like 26 or something like that. I think at this point, I can't see him that way anymore. Maybe because after seeing like The High Note and just a couple other things he did last year, I see him as a high schooler, and I just look like I'm looking back in time or something at a movie that came out years ago. I guess it did. So
looking at like a yearbook from like the past, like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, wow.
Hey, you grow up.
Yeah.
That said, he is the main star in this film alongside Jennifer Ehle, Tim Blake Nelson, A$AP Rocky, John David Washington, Jennifer Hudson, Naz Jones, and Jeffrey Wright.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how you can tell this movie's from the past, because John David Washington, now an actual star, is like playing this like minor supporting role.
That's right.
Yeah,
because I think when this came out, he was just about to come out with BlacKkKlansman, which was kind of the beginning of his first wave of star power there.
Well, he had Ballers before that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the BlacKkKlansman, like in the film scene, is what really kind of,
for sure,
because of the Oscar nomination.
Yeah.
So and then Anthony Mandler directed this film. He's like a music video director mostly. He's done a lot of stuff with Rihanna.
Oh, really? Wow. Who could have told you that?
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah. No. I sorry. I don't mean to jump into your synopsis.
You already got the takes coming. Screenplay is by Rana Blank and Cole Wiley and Janice Schaefer, and it's based on a novel actually called Monster by Walter Dean Myers, which is interesting because when this premiered at Sundance in 2018, I was at that Sundance festival, and I remember this movie was called something else. I think it was called like All Rise or something, and I didn't see it then, but it is just called Monster now, which makes sense because like the movie really like sticks to that whole thing of like this kid is viewed by a lot of people as a monster for his alleged involvement in a robbery that goes wrong and ends the life of a shop clerk. And this film is a legal drama which tracks him as just a 17-year-old kid from a really good family. He's never gotten into trouble before. He just, wrong place, wrong time kind of situation where some other kids on the block that he knows, one that he kind of has like a begrudging friendship with, played by A$AP Rocky, kind of pressures him into, maybe doing some unsavory things. We're not really sure for a lot of this movie what goes down exactly. Eventually, though, the cops pin the murder on him as an accomplice, and he goes to jail in the very beginning of this movie, and we see if his lawyer, played by Jennifer Ely, is able to convince the jury that he's not a monster. That is what the prosecution brings. The very beginning of this movie, the prosecutor is played by Paul Ben Victor, and people probably recognize him from, I think, The Wire, one of his more recognizable roles there. But yeah, I mean, this movie kicks off with like he's looking at this kid who's like, you would never expect, like, we know because of the perspective of this movie, like, it's just a kid, you know, he didn't do anything like deserving to be in this situation, it seems like. And so the movie is a lot of like going through the legal proceedings of it, but then we get a lot of flashbacks into what his life was like before this incident. We see his family life. We see his relationship with his little brother. He lives in New York, kind of means. His dad is like an interior designer, and he has a lot of privilege, but he also has like a curiosity of the more unsavory elements of his neighborhood. And it's something in this movie I don't think really addresses in a very tactful way in terms of like his fascination with this. And because we see that he's a filmmaker, he's a film student, and he wants to like document, he wants to have like a story. And so that is the closest thing we get to a, like, why would he engage with people he knows are bad news? And I think the takeaway of this movie is that because he feels like he should have like a life experience, I guess, or something like that. I'm not 100% sure on that take. But that said, it's, this is a very straightforward, down the middle kind of movie. I was with it, enough. And I found its message to be fairly, I'd say 75% interesting. I don't know if interesting is the right word. There were elements, though, of this movie where I was very split on what it's really trying to say. I struggled a little bit with this movie toward the end of it in particular. I don't know where you stand, Will. Did you like this?
Not particularly, but I don't know if it's exactly for the reasons that you're suggesting. I'll have to kind of parse out what exactly you meant by the message. But in terms of the execution of the film itself, I guess I found myself kind of in a similar boat where I was like kind of with it and kind of against it. The movie takes, as you were suggesting, like a lot of like different visual styles and cues throughout the film. Like I in some ways, I think it works. Like the movie has very 3 different timelines that are very clearly done in different visual styles. Like every time we're in the prison, it's kind of like damp and dark, and it's like close-up shots, like hand camera style. And then when we're in the courtroom, it's like very starkly lit, like like a lot of dolly cams, or like just like different like very staged shots. And then when we're outside the prison in the flashback scenes, like there's like kind of it's like warm hues, and like everything's kind of like a light brown, or like kind of like hazy, and like there's like definitely like a lot of like it's very clear like the visual style of the film was thought upon a lot, and definitely like the way it's edited and compacted together, like there's clearly a lot of thought that went into the making of this film. But I also kind of feel like the execution of the film is so heavily thought over that like it's so caught up in like how it's trying to tell the story that the story itself doesn't really get a lot of time to focus on the humanity of the characters and really fleshing them out outside of just generally like what the presentation of the film is. Like we clearly have some strong actors here and giving good performances. Like Kelvin Harrison Jr. I think is doing a good job. Like I really like Jeffrey Wright's performance in this. Jennifer Hudson I think is good. Like Tim Blake Nelson's always nice to see him. Jennifer Ellie, I think she's pretty good here, but I just don't really get a lot of time to understand them as humans. Like I feel so much of the movie is focused on how it's trying to present these characters, how it's trying to visually approach this narrative, that the execution of it just kind of undermines the dramatic urgency of the film to the point where it kind of overindulges itself to the point of being like kind of melodramatic at times, and like overly heighten everything to the point where it does kind of lose the raw humanity that I think is vital to telling the story, especially a character piece like this, where it's like you said, like kind of focusing on like the character himself trying to find his voice, trying to find himself, while also battling the perception of the public and how they might view him and his association with this crime. And I just think it's kind of a give and pull. Like I admire the director for doing something kind of visually interesting throughout the film, but at the same time, I think it kind of works against him throughout.
Yeah, I think you're going to find me guilty of not liking this movie very much. And I think it's because I just found it to be a little over the top. And I think that it has good intentions. I think clearly they're making a movie and they're trying to say something constructive and informative about the justice system and what it does to people who don't belong in prison. And it's efficient in really getting that across. I think the opening scene in this movie is like exactly right. It's exactly the way that you position our introduction to this kid and his plight without knowing anything about why he's there. You understand immediately that he doesn't belong there. But at the same time, I think they just kind of squander a lot of that goodwill. I think that watching this trial, I'm so sick of, because you kind of mentioned how they shoot the trial very differently. They shoot the prison scenes very differently. That's all spot on. They're clearly doing like a visual style that is flexible, and it's about his perspective and where he's at. And it works because he's a film student. So
yeah,
all that's fine. They try to do this thing where he's like directing his life. And I think that if that's part of the novel, that makes sense. And that is a great flair to add, that sort of voiceover for a novel. But here, it just comes off, at least to me, as pretentious and all these things that do not describe, I think, this kid.
Sure.
And it just threw me off completely. I think Loose is the better version of this. Loose is a very different movie. It's not about a kid who's like being put in jail or anything like that, but it is about a teenager who is sort of torn between cultural, societal expectations and how they view themselves. That's ultimately what Loose is about. And Loose is so much more original and inventive with the way it portrays high school, with the way it portrays high school relationships and things and dynamics between students and teachers. Here, it's like really just straight and uninteresting to me, the way that it tackles this idea, this kid who just these courtroom scenes that I feel like that you could have seen them in like Trial Chicago 7 or something. And then it's like the prison scenes, I think, lack a lot of teeth. I think that they kind of avoid brutalizing this kid and putting a lot of misery into the film, and I do appreciate that. But at the same time, it doesn't have quite the right balance, because then you just sort of find yourself being like unsold, I think, by what's going on in this movie, if that makes any sense.
No, I agree. I mean, I think I was kind of okay with the general sort of pretensions of the film because like I felt they were trying to mirror the character and like his perspective on the situation, how like his influences are very much like he's just like emulating the people that he likes from a filmmaking standpoint. And like if the movie was commenting on that more, I think I would have been okay with it. But after a point, like you said, like what it's trying to say kind of becomes a little bit more shallow because it feels like it's trying to be like all these different things, and the stuff that calls back to the book doesn't really feel as relevant to the movie because it just like the narration, like you said, doesn't really match what we're seeing in terms of the visual execution of it. So I'm constantly thinking about the book and like the narration of it and like him like telling this other story while he's telling this story at the same time. And for me, I just constantly kept thinking about like him making the movie while they're trying to tell this story. And like I said, like if that was kind of the point, which I guess it sort of is and it isn't, like that like he's, like you said, like sort of directing his life, I guess I would have been more with it if it did that a little bit cleaner, like it had more of a narrative through line, I guess. But it just kind of feels like it's like the filmmaker is trying to do like several different things, kind of similar to mainstream, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, I guess so. While I was watching this, I definitely was thinking like, oh gosh, are they going to do a like who's the real monster kind of thing? But
like,
no, I mean,
to the camera and like it's you.
Yeah. I don't want to make it sound like this film is like really bad or that it fails in every respect. It's just frustrating because there are good scenes here. I really like the scene, for example, where we're first introduced to Jennifer Ehley's character, and you just feel the hopelessness when he just sees himself as another name in a book of people who she just sort of is going to write off because how could, here's yet another a young black man saying that he is innocent, and his white defense lawyer, you can just sort of tell that she just, here we go again with this, and she just doesn't seem to be invested. And it's a scene that's really important and really crucial in setting up their dynamic, because clearly that doesn't last. But I don't know, I just wish the film had more of those standout scenes that are just like that in the opening scene. They just feel efficient. They feel like really well thought through. Other scenes here, it's just a lot of like limping to the finish line a little bit of like, yeah, we kind of have to get through this part of the movie. We have to get through this montage of witnesses. We have to do this part of the movie where the teacher gets on the stand. I don't know. It just all feels very not equally investing all the way through.
Yeah, it's a bit scripted. It's a little heavy-handed. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know much about the filmmaker or anything like that, but I'm getting the vibe that, like, I think the filmmakers, they thought so much about this movie that they kind of lost their way afterwards. Like they put so much thought into like how the movie should be presented, what they're trying to say, that I think those like raw human moments are sort of few and far between, because they're so focused on either the visual or storytelling aspects of the film that we kind of need more of those character moments to really make those moments stand out. And unfortunately, I just don't think the movie kind of finds that balance between the humanity and the visual aesthetics.
I also think it's fairly irresponsible to invoke Rashomon, but then have a pretty objective, like, and then here's what happened exactly, of having
it's
like
a little weird about that. Yeah.
Even 12 Angry Men, wisely doesn't try that. It doesn't show us at the very end of that movie, okay, well, here's what happened. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
That's the other thing too, is that like, at least for me, like I never really was like under the impression that he was guilty throughout the film. Like I don't think the movie ever made me believe that he was ever guilty. So it's the idea of like Rashomon, or like you said, 12 Angry Men, where it's like we have a moment of doubt, like, oh, did he do it? Like I think the movie's trying to do that, but I never personally had that moment. I don't know about you.
I think I liked the ambiguity that it was sort of touching on, because I do think as the movie progresses, there are moments where you're like, wait, is he? And I think that there is like this question it's trying to ask of like whether or not he's guilty isn't the point. And I wish the movie had been a little bit more upfront about any of those more implied messages of what is the right punishment for something, like for circumstances and for societal pressures and things like that, if that is what's going on here. But yeah, I just think the movie it just doesn't really cover it,
Yeah. Well, especially with the supporting characters played by A$AP Rocky and John David Washington, I feel like the movie fails to ask that question as well.
I would agree with that. Yeah. And I did mention, what's his name? Jeremy Jerome from When They See Us is also in this.
Oh, yeah.
Jarrell Jerome, excuse me. He has a couple quick moments, and that was unfortunate because... Yeah. Well, that was unfortunate just because like he's so good in When They See Us, and When They See Us is so much better than this, I think, in covering like innocent people dealing with like an unfair justice system and really reckoning with the effects of it. This movie feels so much lesser by comparison, and it's not Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s fault. I think he's doing really good work here. It's none of these performers. I just think that if you're going to watch something along these lines on Netflix, I would watch When They See Us, the miniseries. I think that it's much stronger.
I think we can just point to generally other films that either the movie is emulating or that have come out recently that I think just ultimately do this better. I mean, I can see why Netflix picked it up. I definitely think there is, even though it is a somewhat outdated film, there is obviously a lot of relevance to it, and I can understand why Netflix wanted to release it now. But like you said, unfortunately, I just don't think it fully hits its targets in a way that is ultimately lasting, which is unfortunate, because if this had done it well, this could have been a really amazing movie.
The hyper-cynical part of me, and by hyper-cynical, I mean normal part of me, I basically assume that they pushed this out or were okay with timing it with the result of the Chauvin trial.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well. I was wondering about that.
Hard not to, for sure. So, a very different situation, of course, a very different real-life situation, but I think a lot of people are going to connect some of the themes of this movie, at least, and find themselves, considering... Because just saying, like, the national spotlight was so heavy on that trial. Like people were really analyzing it and looking at the legal procedures.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's kind of hard to separate. That said, I think it could paint whether or not you like the movie. For me, it could go either way. I really don't know.
Well, I do think critics seem to be pretty kind on the film, and I'm wondering if that's why.
It's like a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, you know, like mixed to positive, like light positive. So I'm not sure where people are going to land on it with hindsight. We'll see. But for me, I am a very low C+, kind of verging on a C. But I do give it a little bit of a bump because I do think the performances are good, and I like a bunch of the scenes in this. And yeah, I think that if it had come out in a different time, I'm really curious what I would have thought maybe at Sundance 2018, because it looked like some of the reviews out of Sundance were a bit more positive. So I wish I had had that festival air, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too far from you. I think I'd give it like a low to moderate C+. There's a lot here to like. I definitely am impressed by Kelvin Harrison Jr. yet again. I think he is quite a dynamic young actor, and I think he carries this film well enough, as well as just the general supporting cast I think is good. A$AP Rocky I think is also quite good as well. I'm kind of sad that he hasn't really done as much acting outside of this and Dope.
Yeah,
I think he's pretty charismatic, and I think he's a good supporting actor. I don't know if he's going to do any lead stuff in the future, but I like him as an actor. I think he's good. I'd like to see him do more stuff.
Yeah, he has a lot of charm.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to value here. I do actually kind of generally admire the film for having a strong visual style, but like I said, I also think that kind of undermines what it's doing because it gets so caught up in how it's telling its story that it doesn't focus on the story it's trying to tell. So moderate C+ for me.
Should mention though with A$AP Rocky, wasn't he arrested a couple years ago?
Oh, was he? I don't know.
I think he assaulted somebody.
Oh, really? Oh, jeez.
I'd have to look into that. I don't want to talk slander or anything. So
yeah. Well, I did not know about that. I'll say that up front.
Yeah, it's like as soon as I said like, yeah, A$AP Rocky. Wait a minute. I'm not sure if yeah.
Well, yeah, like I said, didn't know about that.
That said, though, I mean, he's had issues. Like he was like a drug dealer in his earlier life and complicated past. Very talented guy. But all right, that is Monster. It's available to stream right now on Netflix. It's been kind of dancing around the top 10, and it's only 98 minutes long. Pretty easy to watch that one in one sitting. Now, we do have a problem, Will Ashton, as we kind of move into our last film of the week here. So far, we've had the same grade. We're 2 for 2. And
yeah,
that already happened like once in the last like 30 days. And I'm not here to let it happen again. But I think maybe this will be what breaks the curse.
Okay, I was going to say, our Mitchell versus Machines conversation caused a bit of a rift. So I was actually kind of glad that we were coming back together this week, because I imagine next week we're going to be on a divide again. I don't know if we will. I'm just assuming.
I mean, I appreciate, Will, that you want us to agree. You want us to be friends. You want us to have, you know, what's the word? Congenial, you know, back and forth. Not me. Yeah. I want the spice.
You want the knives.
I want the heat.
All right.
Yeah. It makes for a better show. I'm being a bit more of like Andrew Garfield and mainstream. You know, I want the clicks.
Well, I thought we would be a little bit combative with mainstream, so I was kind of surprised that we were on the same wavelength there. So
we weren't that far off on Under the Silver Lake. So
okay. So yeah, let's see how we feel about Pink Skies Ahead.
Let's talk about Pink Skies Ahead. This is a new comedy, kind of a dramedy that was written and directed by. Say again?
No, I would agree. I'd say dramedy. I wouldn't define it as a strict comedy.
Yeah. Because it definitely has a lot of dark elements too. It's about mental health in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it gets pretty serious at the end.
Yeah. It was written and directed by Kelly Oxford. This is her first feature film. It stars Jessica Barden, Marcia Gay Harden, Michael McKean, Rosa Salazar, Lewis Pullman, Odeya Rush, Henry Winkler, Mary J. Blige, Evan Ross. Really good cast here.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, good cast.
The movie had its world premiere at AFI Fest last October, and it just came out Saturday on MTV Films. It had like a TV premiere. I guess it's technically like a TV movie, I suppose.
What have we become?
Hey, nothing wrong with TV movies. Usually we just watch TV movies on Netflix, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this one, I was watching this and I was sold because, okay, it's Jessica Barton.
Yeah, I was going to say.
We like Jessica Barton on this podcast.
Yeah.
She is a strong actor.
I was going to say, because I don't even think this movie was on your radar, but I was just like, hey, there's this new movie with Jessica Barton coming out, and like the Kool-Aid Man, he just burst into MTV's office and is like, give me the screener.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it. In terms of Jessica Barton, I mean, I've been a fan of her since the first thing I saw from her was The End of the Effing World. And I also liked her in The Lobster. I just didn't I wasn't aware of her when I saw The Lobster, to be totally clear, right? That said, I'm watching this movie and I'm like, I don't know. She has like an American accent. I don't know if I buy this. But then the movie does something that wins me over immediately. And I'm like, okay, here we go. This is the movie I want to watch right now. It says that it is set in 1998. And Will, you know me, you know that if a movie, that's all a movie has to do. It could have nothing to do with the 90s, and it doesn't. Yeah. But if it just says...
I think if you... Yeah. Like there's that Drake meme where it's, like him like pushing away and then like being like, oh yeah. And I think if you like 80s nostalgia, you're like, no, I don't want that. 90s nostalgia? Give that to me. That's
Bring it
like
on
you
over.
Right now. Yeah.
Give it. And it's only because I'm starving for it. We don't get enough of it. I mean, come on. 90s nostalgia, we maybe get like Captain Marvel? Like, how many times are we going to mention that movie in this show?
Oh, one more doesn't hurt.
Yeah, rule 3. So this movie, it's a pretty straightforward kind of coming of age film. Our main character is 20. Impressive for Jessica Barton just because like they shot this when she was like 27 or 26. And yeah, she's like still playing younger, almost high school characters. But it's credit to her range.
It's weird for me because like she's about my age in this, and I just can't think of me like playing a high schooler. But I guess that's why I'm not an actor.
Well, you may not want to see our bit that I had planned for next week. John and Will have to pretend to be in high school again in order to stop a criminal conspiracy. It's a very original screenplay I'm working on.
Sounds pretty problematic.
But yeah, so this movie, it's kind of like I said, like a coming of age sort of thing. Our main character is named Winona, played by Jessica Barton. She's kind of in a series of Arrested Development. She can't get her license. She has blue hair. She has kind of like partier friends.
The series of Arrested Development, she's not in that, but she is in a series of Arrested Development, yes.
I was hoping, that was the joke.
Sure.
She just kind of finds herself at a bit of a crossroads. She works for her dad. She dropped out of school. And she just doesn't have like a clear idea of what she wants to do. And kind of moving from there, she's kind of like dating a guy who's going to be like a PhD, person, and he's going to get his PhD. I don't know why I phrased it that way. And she's trying to find a problem with her experience. She has like very, I need life experiences kind of personality, which is usually something that really irks me. It's like the people who like their personality is traveling because they can't just like sit still and enjoy a single moment. They're just obsessed with being a tourist in other places.
Sure.
Yeah, she just kind of finds herself like a little bit like, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that I need to go through something. She goes to her doctor, played by Henry Winkler, and is like, diagnosed me with something. He's been her pediatrician for years and years.
I was gonna say, I definitely preferred the pediatrician version of Henry Winkler in this as opposed to On the Count of Three.
I was gonna say, but I was like, our listeners haven't seen that movie yet, so they won't understand.
It'll make sense to them when they see the movie. Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway,
sure.
Keep going.
Very good point. I did think about that during this, so very fair. She's just like, diagnose me with something. Give me a disease. She wants to be able, because she's a writer. She mentions that throughout the movie. She's like, she wants to, but she can't write unless she does something or goes through something. So he diagnoses her with anxiety disorder, and is like, yeah, you have anxiety. And he tries to get her to go to like a group for like people who have panic attacks. And she's like, I've never gone through this. This is ridiculous. But of course, this movie is kind of about how that sort of stuff builds and happens for the first time. It's really, really traumatic in that sense. This movie is very confusing to me. I mentioned that it was like a comedy, but then it's like a dark comedy. And the reason I struggle to like say it's one or the other is because it's like half and half, and the two never really quite go together. It's like really comedic and light, and then it'll be extremely dark and really like triggering. So I maybe that was the point. Maybe that's what Oxford was going for. What do you think?
I think it's a bit of that, and I think it's also that she's a first-time filmmaker. I don't think she's done any short films or anything like that. I haven't checked, so I could be speaking out of turn. But, I mean, she comes from a writing background, and I know, generally speaking, when writers go to direct, and they haven't had any directing experience, they tend not to always nail those tone balances.
So, I'll say Kelly Oxford. This is what I know about her. She's kind of like a blogger person. She was in like the early 2000s. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she got into like writing online and script writing before it was like, or like kind of at the height of it, I guess. I was going to say before, but it really was like the height of like blogging. Yeah. And she gained a huge following during that time. She was like one of the first like really big like Twitter influencers for like the writing community.
In like 2009, when that was like kind of a new thing to do.
She was in the first wave, and she kind of, she's connected to people like Diablo Cody, for example. She's written for like TV shows. Yeah, she's worked with like Jessica Alba, and one thing, she's written a few books too.
Yeah, books of essays.
Yeah, she's one of her biggest like moments of notoriety on Twitter was during the 2016 election. She was kind of at like the height of like Me Too and stuff, where she like, she was one of the ones who like used the hashtag. She wasn't the first, but she used the hashtag not okay, and was like, tweet me your first assaults, like in the aftermath of the Donald Trump tapes, right?
Okay. Yeah. So
yeah, she's very, very like hyper brand kind of person, very provocative, very outspoken about her beliefs and everything like that. I don't think she has made any short films. I think she worked on she's done something in the 90s before that. It was like a show she was working on for Hulu, but I don't know if it ever came out. I remember hearing about it, and I think that was the last I heard of it. So now we have this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think she was involved as like a writer and an actress on that show, right? I don't know if she was directing it, but she could have been. I don't know.
I think, she was. I know she was working on it. Yeah, I assume she was writing it and maybe was a showrunner.
Yeah, that makes sense. But anyway, yeah. So, new
That's
beyond
Kelly
the
Oxford.
filmmaking scene. Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, I think she's pretty well known in the literary scene. Like, both of her books, I believe, have been bestsellers. But, she's not really as well known outside of like the blogging and Twitter sphere for some folks. So, a little refresher isn't too bad.
Yeah. Well, I imagine a lot of people like we have younger listeners. I feel like she's not somebody like, the teens and college aged cinemaholics have probably heard of too much. Because I to be fair, I haven't really heard from her in it feels like 4 or 5 years. So it's kind of interesting to see her come back and with this, something for MTV. And I don't know. I struggled a bit with this movie. It has things I love in it. It has actors I love. It has a story that is really personal to me. I've had panic attacks. It's something that runs in my family. It's something that I always appreciate a film having a deft hand in. And I think she depicts this sort of situation and this sort of condition really accurately, almost to a fault. But I don't think I ever quite connected with this movie. Did you?
I'm actually gonna. Well, I was hoping we would disagree secretly, but I think we're actually pretty well in line in this. I was. I was with you in the sense that, like, at the beginning of the movie, I was kind of rolling my eyes and being like, "Oh boy, here's another one of these coming of age kind of movies."
Mamma Mia, here we go again.
Sure, like kind of the liberated parents, the like. hyper relevant sense of time period, the outspoken young high school to college age girl. Its influences seem pretty apparent here, like Lady Bird and like Ghost World and a few other films in this vein. Like it seems like this movie's kind of emulating them in some fashion or another. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just not really. I was a little disappointed at first. I'm like, I'm not really feeling this. It just kind of feels like a lesser version of other better films. And I don't think that ever fully goes away. But once the characters get a little settled in, and we do spend more time with Jessica Barden's character, I did find the film to be more endearing. Even if it didn't get like exceptionally better, it does kind of calm down and does tend to be a little bit more, like you said, personal and character focused. And I was like, okay, I'm kind of with this. I'm kind of with its vibe. I can really relate to some scenes in this. There's definitely, like you said, because it's so personal, it does, like, I can respect what it's doing, and I can get into the character's headspace and understand her. And I really think Jessica Barden does a nice job. I can agree with you that the accent does get a little taking used to, but otherwise I do think she does a nice job with this, and I think she's able to handle the stark tonal shifts a little bit easier because like she is such a star presence in this. That's like, okay, she can do both tones pretty well. It does make the transition from the more lighthearted stuff into the more heady and serious stuff a little gradual, or a little bit easier to process. But yeah, I mean, the movie itself, in terms of the narrative, it does kind of fall into a few expected beats. It does hit a lot of tropes and cliches that we've seen before, particularly one with Michael McKean's father character, where without giving anything away, Jessica Barden's character kind of assumes one thing is happening, and it's like, no, it's not this, it's this other relevant thing. And it's just like, that's been so played out at this point. It's just like, we've seen that in a million other movies. And it's just like, there's other little things like that too. But I did end up reading the essay that this movie is based on, and just kind of to pierce together what stuff is from her real life and what stuff is kind of dramatized for this. And based on what I was reading for that article, the scenes that I found myself more endeared by or found myself more impressed with tend to be the stuff that was lifted from her real life. And the things that I was kind of less okay with, I found were kind of the more like added things in here to kind of like fluff it out and kind of make it more of a like traditional Hollywoodized movie of this. And maybe just my way of saying that, like, I guess when the movie is kind of a little bit more, like we said, like from her own experience and does clearly relate to her own life, I found myself really admiring and feeling myself appealed by the movie and appreciating what she's doing. But when it's trying to like kind of be like 15 other of these movies, I find myself constantly thinking of those movies and not thinking so much about what the movie is trying to do here.
Yeah, that definitely rings true for me as well. Yeah, there were parts here that resonated and just parts that didn't. I thought about Lady Bird a lot while watching this. I thought that Lady Bird just is supremely a better put together movie about some of the same things. And what I like about Lady Bird is how it adds so much other stuff to the teen experience to make the character feel more well-rounded, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this kind of just feels like a one-note kind of experience of a film. And at the same time, there's really good dialogue in this, as you would expect from Kelly Oxford. I think that there's one piece of dialogue involving a fork that definitely going to stick out in my mind for a while, and delightfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
I do not have much to add. I think that I'm going to end up going with an extremely low B-. That was a C+, but the reason I'm bumping it up to B- for two reasons. One, the soundtrack.
Jessica Barden. Okay.
The soundtrack is fantastic. Well, Jessica Barden's the reason this isn't a C. So it's that, the soundtrack. But then also, just going to say it, I don't want to agree with you again. I know you're going to give this thing like a C+, maybe a C. So I'm just kidding. That's not, it's just the soundtrack.
Yeah. I would say for like an hour or so of this movie, I was wavering between, throughout the whole thing, I was wavering between a B- and a C+. For like the first hour or so, I was in the C+ territory. I'm just like, I admire what the movie's doing. I'm just not really connecting with it too much. I appreciate the performances. I really like the supporting cast in this a lot. I really did enjoy Henry Winkler's performance. I thought that was going to be like kind of like too sitcom-y or weird, but like all of those scenes I thought really worked well. And I thought he had good chemistry with Jessica Barden. And I was like, I actually kind of wish there was more stuff with the with the doctor. I found this kind of appealing and sweet. But throughout the film, it's just kind of like, yeah, you know, appreciate what it's doing, not really connecting with it. And then I want to say, like, in the last, like, 20 minutes, it kind of, once it did settle down, it really hit home its points. It resonated with me in a way I wasn't really expecting. And I guess I found myself pretty unexpectedly endeared to what Kelly Oxford was doing here as a director and filmmaker. And I was just like, oh, you know what? I don't think this is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think she's really hitting all of her points as well as she should. Some of this is way too over-satirized. Like, some of this is too muted. Some of this is, like, kind of focusing on things I think I wish weren't focused on, and some aspects I kind of wish they were heightened a bit. But there's, I think, something here to be said about living with anxiety and, like, the idea of, like, kind of feeling stagnant in your life and, like, trying to find your, like, kind of core center. That it's not new, it's not fresh, but for an MTV movie, I think it generally kind of works by the end. And I don't know, I found it ultimately kind of sweet. And so I'm going to be same as you and give it a low B-, like a very low B-. Like I said, I don't think it quite works, but there's enough here that by the end I was just like, you know what? I appreciate its spunk. I admire what it's doing, and I didn't hate the time I had with it.
Now I think you're just matching my grade on purpose. Although, okay, I do think it's funny that you're like, as soon as this movie settles down, I thought you were going to be like, you know, like moves out of the house and it gets a job and it just starts to get stuff together. That's when it starts to work for you.
Sure.
But yeah, no, mostly agree with your points there. And yeah, it's not a bad little film. Definitely worth seeking out if you are a fan of anybody involved and are looking for kind of a breezy Sunday afternoon watch. I think it works.
Yeah. I was kind of surprised this wasn't at Sundance, because this kind of feels like the type of movie.
Oh, yes. Or South by.
Yeah, like you'd see at like 2 p.m. on like a Sundance Saturday or something and be like, yeah, it was all right.
Yeah. Although I should say it was actually supposed to premiere at South by last year, but this thing happened. You might have heard about it.
Oh, yeah?
It kind of made things a little trickier if they were scheduled to happen in March of 2020. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, I was wondering why these things that were supposed to happen in March just stopped happening. You know, I was just like, where's my invites, guys?
Yeah, there you go. All right, well, that is Pink Skies Ahead. It is just 94 minutes long. It has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Doing pretty well, 10 reviews. Its average rating is like a 7.6 out of 10, so it's a little low for a 90%, but that's kind of to be expected when a lot of reviews haven't been filed quite yet. I'm not sure how people can watch this one right now. I know it was available. It was on MTV, and then I watched it as a screener. Did you watch it on? Oh yeah, you watched it as a screener as well. I don't know if it's available on demand or anything. So
I think it's on demand because it, just like you said, it aired on MTV. So if you have, you know, like whatever FiOS or something, I'm sure it's available on the box. But MTV, when I went to tape this initially, I realized that their programming slate is pretty dire at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just basically like ridiculousness episodes and then like movies that came out like 10 years ago. So my guess is that they're going to be playing this movie a lot on MTV. So if you're tuning into this, check MTV and see if it's playing now. If not, it'll probably play sometime soon.
That's it for us this week. We'll be back next week to review who knows what. A lot of films coming out. But yeah, definitely connect with us on social media if you have any suggestions for the show. And we'll be spending our time trying to watch a ton of indie movies and trying to figure out which ones people are going to care about. So there you go.
Sure.
From the Internet California, I'm John Agroni.
And for the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
See you next time.